that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
A large, hairy creature with arms that hang down beside bore down on its sides.
And I told him my name, and when I told him his name, he said he was called Code.
It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of.
You're listening to the Strangeology podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Foran, and this is your place to explore the weird, strange, and unexplained. From cryptids and creatures, the paranormal, aliens and UFOs, forbidden knowledge, ancient mysteries, conspiracies, and more. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up on today's edition of the show is a conversation about cryptids of the sea, folklore, storytelling, and even some paranormal encounters. Well, summer is finally starting to wind down here in New England. Just the other day, I started noticing some orange and red leaves starting to pop off, which usually mid-August is about the time that you start seeing the random tree here and there, but peak foliage doesn't really hit until Columbus Day weekend or something like that. End of September, early October. So just this past weekend from when I'm recording this, I went to Squonkapalooza number 2 in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, that was hosted and put together by Lisa from Cryptid Comforts and Joe from Cryptoteology. And it was an awesome time. Getting there was a little dicey because there was a hurricane remnant. I believe it was Hurricane Debbie, and I had to drive through upstate New York to get to Pennsylvania, and I just hit this band of really heavy rain for a little while. Thankfully, though, it passed quick, and most of the ride was pretty uneventful, although I didn't get into my hotel until like 10 or 10:30 at night after leaving at 11:30 in the morning. I was hoping to leave earlier, but you know, that sometimes you get a little bit of snafu stuff happening when you're trying to pack and all that. But it was a great event. The morning was super nice temperature wise, and the whole day was actually just beautiful. Sunny weather. There were lots of people that came out, and really some awesome vendors all around. I was in this kind of block of people like Easton Hawk, Danner from Conjure Dust Designs, Jamie Snell. We were all kind of lined up there. Ballyraven Folklore was across the pathway. And it was just a super fun event. I highly recommend going to next year's event as well if you are in that area. So yeah, it was just a fun time overall, and glad that I got to chat with some of you and even get some new listeners out there. There were a few people that were checking out my booth, and they're like, "Oh, you have a podcast?" And so I usually carry business cards with links and all that, and definitely some new people. Welcome to the show. If you're listening now, definitely glad to have you here. And as far as other events, the only event that I have confirmed for the rest of the year right now, I do have another one that's in the works, just not confirmed yet, is the Sasquatch Calling Festival or Calling Contest in Whitehall, New York. This is going to be my 3rd year doing this event. It is a super fun time. It's in the Skeensboro Park in Whitehall, New York, and it's an all-day, all-ages event. It's like a big craft fair with all sorts of cryptid vendors and all that. Very heavily Bigfoot, Sasquatch themed, of course. And at the end, there is a calling contest where people give their best Bigfoot calls. And there's also going to be speakers as well. It's just a super fun time. And that time of the year, it's happening September 28th. It's a Saturday. And you know, it's beautiful weather. At least it has been like past couple years that I've done it. Knock on wood that it'll be nice weather this year as well. But it is a super fun time. So definitely catch me there. And if you're ever wondering about future events, I'm trying to keep up with my website events page. And so things will be up there. And hopefully within the next episode or two, I'll be able to announce whether or not I've got another event going on, which thankfully it's an event that's actually pretty close and won't be a 9, 10, 11, 12 hour drive for me. But that's about all the updates I have for now. And just a couple quick reminders before we get into today's episode. Make sure to set your podcast app to auto download so you never miss a new episode of the show. And don't forget to follow Strangeology over on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, etc. for more content, updates, giveaways, and all that. Also, make sure to visit my website, strangeology.com. I have a blog there with a bunch of articles, and you can also sign up to my mailing list to receive updates and get occasional promo codes to my Etsy shop if you're ever looking for Strangeology merch, which is at strangeology.etsy.com. And I'm always trying to add new designs as I have time. And also, don't forget to join my Discord server if you have a Discord and you like chatting with other people who are passionate about the strange and unexplained. I've got the link in my show notes, but you can join at discord.io/Strangeology if you want to join an ever-growing community of Fortean fans. And as always, the best way to support the show is to tell your friends and anyone who loves cryptids, the paranormal, aliens and UFOs, ancient mysteries, and all that good stuff. And if you really love the show and you want to support what I do, you can always become a member by heading over to patreon.com/Strangeology, and you can join for as little as $1 per month. Any support helps out a ton and helps keep the lights on here at Strangeology HQ. Higher tiers unlock more perks like early access to new episodes that are ad-free. You also get access to Strangeology Beyond, which is the members-only episode extension and bonus episodes. A lot of the times when I have guests, we'll do extended guest interviews. And for my research episodes, it's often a whole other research topic as well. There's also a permanent merch discount for my Etsy shop, exclusive merch, voting power for different topics, and other bonus content and more. So if you want to join a growing community of like-minded people who are into the strange and unexplained, it is a great place to be. I appreciate the support, and the more of it I get, the more content I can create for everyone out there. And to those members out there, thank you so much for your continued support. And for anyone who wants to join, we'll see you there. All right, that's enough of that. Let's get into today's episode. For this one, I brought on a brand new guest, author Michael Thompson, and we had a super fun conversation about his book series, cryptid storytelling, mysteries, folklore, and more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. All right, folks, welcome back to the show. Joining me today is author Michael Thompson. Michael is an independent author, illustrator, voice actor, and realm hopper, which we're going to be getting into what that is. He began his journey into writing as a teenager and has since joined in on the speaker panel circuit, along with different programs, other podcasts discussing his works, cryptids, folklore, and we're going to be talking a little bit about his Winslow Hoffner book series, High Ceiling Adventures and Incredible Encounters, which is super fun and you definitely need to check out. So, hi, Michael. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So yeah, we got to meet at Monster Fest in Ohio. I guess, man, time flies. It was end of June, so about a month and some change ago. And I have to thank you again for helping me out when I was setting up. I have this. For those of you out there, I know sometimes listeners actually come out to the shows that I go to and vend at. And you might know that I have these big metal racks that I put my shirt merch on, and my stuff was falling apart. I was missing screws. I had missing object phenomenon happen to me. And Michael came in for the win with some gator clips to help kind of jerry rig it together. So thanks again, man. That was
no problem. I always have so much with all my little handouts and bookmarks.
Yeah,
and stuff,
for sure.
I just gave you the whole pile.
Yes. Yeah, definitely saved the day. So I want to get into your journey as an author. You started at a pretty young age. What sparked your interest in things like cryptids and folklore and the unknown? And how did that evolve into pursuing this path as an author and a speaker?
Yeah, I've always loved the unknown. I've always loved folklore, reading about mythology and then reading about cryptozoology. It's kind of like a modern mythology. It's mythology that's happening right now, and there could be monsters in your own backyard. And I always thought that was really cool. I started writing when I was really young. I was always creating. I was always drawing since I could hold a crayon. And when I was 9 years old, I wrote my first book, Chicken Boy and the Wrath of Dr. Dimwad. And when I got a little bit older, I self-published it. I started self-publishing when I was 13. And the Chicken Boy series is still going. I got the latest one here, Chicken Boy and the Might of the Monkey Man. So I'm still drawing. And I'm working on anniversary editions of the first three now. But this is the latest and greatest here. But as far as like the folklore goes, when I was in high school, this line came into my head out of nowhere. Usually when I'm writing a story, there's either a foundational image or a foundational line, and then all the rest of the story sort of flows out of that. And for the Winslow Hoffner series, it began with what would become the first line of the first chapter of the first book, which is, "Have you ever stared straight into the eyes of death and scoffed?" And I thought, ooh, and it sort of came through just like that in that voice and everything. And so I typed that into a document and I saved it. And then later on in high school, I got the assignment to write a short story. And I thought, let's look into this eyes of death situation and see what this could turn into. And I got the sense that it was a man of the sea, from the dialect. And then I thought, well, what are the eyes of death? Like, what story is he telling? And my foundational interest in cryptozoology bubbled up. And I thought, ooh, what if we did a cryptid sea adventure, a cryptid fisherman tale? And I remembered the story of Gambo. I was really into globsters, which for those who don't know, that's a portmanteau between glob and monster to describe anything that washes ashore that's hard to identify. And so I remembered the story of Gambo from 1983. It was this unidentified creature that washed ashore, looked sort of like a dolphin and had like this big, long beaked sort of face with all these like 80 conical teeth and these little webbed feet. And I thought, okay. And I really liked the name. I thought it was a strong sounding name. And then so I decided to look into that. And before anyone had a chance to really scientifically document this creature, it was chopped up and buried in the sand. The head was sold to a tourist, it's been said. And I thought, this is perfect. I can do whatever I want with this thing. So I decided to adapt it into a fire-breathing fish for the story in my book. And that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah. And Gambo is the, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the very opening chapter of the book.
That's right.
And I mean, everyone out there, you got to check out the book, and especially the audio book, because Michael narrates the whole thing and brings the characters to life. It's just super, super fun listen. But yeah, no, that's great. I think we all, many of us that study this subject, anything in the Fortean umbrella, we always had this kind of draw to it and some kind of unexplainable interest in this kind of stuff. But yeah, no, globsters are definitely super interesting. And I was unfamiliar with Gambo. I know like the St. Augustine monster from Florida that was well photographed and documented and talked about. And your focus for this book is a lot of sea monsters, legends of sea monsters and that kind of thing. And there's just so much out there, or these old legends of sailors crossing the ocean and things coming out of the water that are unrecognizable, and they just become these tall tales. But so you mentioned that this line came to you in your head, and it was this sailor character, Winslow Hoffner.
Mm-hmm.
Can you expand a little bit on what kind of person is Winslow Hoffner? Was there an inspiration behind this character to use as a framework to discuss cryptids and folklore and other sea creatures?
Well, the interesting thing about it is there's this kind of perfect union between the setting of the book and the theme of cryptozoology. The sea is just like the perfect setting for the unknown. You're out on the surface, and if you've ever been on the water and you see no land on either side of you, then you get a real sense of the vastness, and you get a real sense that anything could be hiding under there. And the unknown is just a perfect foundation for a story. As far as Winslow himself goes, he kind of came out of nowhere. In many aspects, he has sort of the aesthetic of your traditional sailor, your traditional man of the sea guys. He's seen a lot of stuff, but it's not the stuff that you expect. And I think that Winslow in the story kind of represents an inversion of the tropes. Although like you approach him and you think you know what you're going to get, you really have no idea. I mean, he's so tall tales and fisherman tales in general are kind of associated with a stretching of the truth. But as we find out, the more we seep into Winslow's world and these stories, it's all real. The Winslow Hoffner series sort of takes the position that it's all true. All the legends are true. And John, our main character in the first book, is this very skeptical journalist, and he's thinking that he's been assigned a fluff piece, and because he's the new guy. And then the more he listens, the more he drifts into a more magical reality, because he starts to believe it. And then in this book, believing is kind of seeing more than seeing is believing. It's the characters are sort of rewarded for their belief with these legendary moments.
Interesting. It's kind of a fun juxtaposition, thinking about things that happen to people out here in the real world, outside of a book. A lot of the times, seeing is believing for most people. And in a lot of the cases where encounters and sightings of these fantastic beasts and cryptids happen, it's usually unexpected, and it happens out of the blue. Like they kind of choose for you to see them. With anything within the Fortean phenomena that's that's out there. Now, have you? What was you have all these other characters. Do you have like a specific process for developing them and doing all this research for these stories? Because I mean, you have several chapters in this series, and each one kind of focuses on a different creature. Yeah, it's definitely, it's kind of a monster of the week type vibe, as you go through each of the chapters. I definitely do a lot of research. Sometimes I have sort of a scene that pops into my head, and then I'll try to find a cryptid that would match that, because I like to have what I call the real world tether in the story. I think it's a fun aspect to have these adventures, and then
if you feel so inclined to look up any of the sort of dates or the monsters mentioned, then you'll see these old news articles and you'll see that it's all true. And it kind of creates this living mythos with the real world. That's super fun. To the point where it kind of blends. Like I've had readers ask me about other aspects of the book, and like I tried to look up cryptolabes and I can't find anything. I was like, that was made up for the book, and that's like this sort of cryptid tracking device in the center of the story. And people are even asking me if Winslow Hoffner himself was a real guy, and no, he's a creation. But for instance, there was this one moment for the It Weren't No Sandbar chapter where I had come up on that part in the book, and I was about to move on to the next chapter, but then the scene came to me of this giant lobster crashing through the waves. And I thought, ooh, okay, are there any large crustaceous cryptids? And so I started doing my research, and I came upon, old vintage sea maps like the Carta Marina, which is like one of my favorite monster maps of all time. And that had, a big lobster, like, with a guy in his claw and stuff. And I thought that was pretty cool, but I wanted something a little bit more modern, and I was having trouble finding a cryptid for that one. But I thought, okay, well, why don't I just look up where the biggest lobster ever caught in the world was ever scooped up. And as it turned out, magically, it's exactly where the book takes place, in Nova Scotia, back in the 70s. And so I thought, oh, all right. So this guy, I kind of went with that, and it's had a few decades to grow exponentially. So that one's just kind of based on a record-breaking catch. But I also do research based on the location and trying to make it as believable as possible. I have done phone calls to verify the validity of single lines of dialogue. For instance, I called different locations, different fish restaurants in Nova Scotia. There was a line with the cook in the second chapter in The Trouble with Mermaids, where Ken Keeley, our cook, who becomes the new force of skepticism moving forward in the book after John, and he has a line where he says, "You just love making me work with mackerel, don't you, Wins?" And I'm like, is that correct? Is that in season? So I spend hours on the phone just to make sure that everything is accurate for something even as small as that.
Yeah, that's great. Now, Bayfield, Nova Scotia, was there, why Nova Scotia versus somewhere else for the setting of where the series took place?
It's just the amount of coastline that it has, and it kind of just sort of revealed itself to me that way. It was just kind of a magical thing. If I was like to pick, I would probably put it like in Maine or somewhere, but it just kind of like it came into my head that way. And I always just surrender to, the will of the story kind of, I always try to be the author that my story wants it to be. So, and as it turns out, that's just where it happened to take place. So I had to do a little extra research. Yeah. So,
yeah. I mean, it's a perfect setting, especially with the fisherman vibe and everything. And, there's interesting stuff that happens up in Nova Scotia with cryptid sightings, as well as things like, what was it? Shag Harbor, the UFO, the incident back in, what was it? The 60s. Then you have Oak Island, of course, if you like the ancient mysteries.
I want to say they had, was it Nova Scotia? Did they have sightings of the father of all sea turtles?
It might have been. It might have been.
Yeah, it was a big one.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Oh, speaking of turtles, I think I was listening to the audiobook and there was a section on the Beast of Busco. And
that's correct.
I was kind of surprised that during it where they're like, they're trying, I can't remember the character's name right now, but they were trying to take him out. And I was like, oh no, not Oscar.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's our antagonist, Giuseppe Scialpi, who represents kind of the inversion of Winslow's ideals. Winslow is kind of a form of positive chaos. He kind of goes with the flow, and he loves these creatures. And then Scialpi is kind of a negative form of order,
Yeah.
of logics, everything by the books, no matter what. And so they're an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, you gotta have the foil.
And so as we go into Winslow's past, we see that he had these connections with these other people who have a certain reason to pursue cryptids in a different way than Winslow does now. Winslow, it's almost like they're drawn to him when he's out on his voyages and fishing.
Right.
But back in the day, there's this other group of people with less pure intentions.
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's kind of tying in true human nature to this kind of thing. Seeing people comment on social media or on message boards or what have you, and they're like, that's nothing that such and such a weapon couldn't take care of, and I'll put it on my trophy wall or whatever. It's like, well, I mean, but yeah. So I've got to ask, because I'm sure my listeners are curious, have you ever experienced anything like an unexplained creature, or maybe even anything paranormal that kind of deepened your interest into the unexplained, realizing that like, oh, there's something else out here, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. I have not seen any cryptid creatures yet. I hope to one day. I'm always looking. I'm always when I'm driving to these conventions, these cryptid conventions, I'm always like looking out the window, like glancing at the woods, because I take these long drives and I'm like, watch a Bigfoot just run across the street.
Right.
Right. But I have had plenty of my share of ghostly encounters.
Interesting.
Sort of spiritual encounters. I had one where, this is a pretty cool story. I was in college, and my grandfather was a big part of my life. I always loved writing my books so that he could read them, because he had such a great voice, and I loved, bringing him new chapters and then like hearing him read it out loud. Back when I was writing World of the Orb, for instance, this is where Realm Hopper comes from. This is my young adult fantasy novel here, about a couple of kids who discover the hidden world the museum was trying to keep secret.
Oh, wow. And
so this was my debut novel. This is the sort of chunkiest book I ever wrote after my Chicken Boy books. And my grandfather had passed away before that book was published. And I was still in college at the time. And I was about to graduate. I was at this honors ceremony where we were presenting like our final sort of research projects. It was all in this big room, and they had this banquet, and they were passing out raffle tickets for this big prize, an iPad, an iPad mini sort of thing. And then they had some other prizes too. And they said, everyone hang on to your tickets. We're going to do the raffle in an hour. And they had someone like walking by with the iPad, and I was looking at it, and I thought, oh, wow, it would be great to have that. Because, the plan for me was to finish this book, get it published, and then hit the Comic-Con circuit, which, previously I had done, bookshops, indie bookshops and Barnes and Nobles, but I hadn't done Comic-Cons yet. So I was going to take this as my Comic-Con debut, and I needed a way to collect the money, and Square was sort of getting popular. I had seen commercials for that. And so when I saw the iPad, I thought, oh man, I could use that as my register. I hope I win that. And then audibly in my left ear, I could hear my grandfather's voice. And he said, you know what? I'm going to get that for you. And to the point where I looked left and there was nobody standing next to me. And I thought, okay, let's see what happens. And then an hour later, I'm standing up. They're like, we're going to do the raffle. We're going to do the draw for the iPad. And my friend comes up next to me and she's like, oh, I forgot my ticket. Well, I hope you win. I was like, we'll see. And then they start calling the numbers, whatever it was. It was like 5, 3, 8, 2, 4. And I'm looking at my number. I said, I won. And then my friend's like, what? And they're like, come on up. And so I go up, and then they hand me the prize. They hand me second prize. And I was like, oh, okay. They're building up to the iPad. And then I walked back, and it was like a bag full of coffee and like a thermos and stuff like that. And then my friend's like, didn't you win the iPad? I was like, I guess they're building up to it. And then the organizers run down. They're like, was your number just called? I said, yes. They said, oh, no, you were supposed to get the iPad. And I was like, oh, here. And I tried to give them back second place. And they're like, yeah, keep that too. And then so then 8 years later, that has been my register for every book signing.
Interesting. And so you heard the disembodied voice of your grandfather, and it says he's going to get it for you. Wow. Interesting. That's a pretty cool story.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Wow. Jeez. It's pretty cool. Right? Pretty nice grandpa too.
Yeah. And he was always into like gadgets and technology too. So it's like exactly the thing that, he would, be interested in. So I thought that was kind of special.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. That's a really cool experience. Thank you for sharing that, for sure.
Sure.
Yeah. Wow. Well, off of that, quick little, side quest there. I'm wondering, with your writing and your research, you look into all this folklore and everything. How do you balance staying true to folkloric stories while adding your own flair and creative elements within your writing?
Ooh, that is a great question. I really like the process of adaptation for these cryptids. And I do it in a couple of different ways. Sometimes I really like the obscure ones because there's more room for sort of creative license. And like as far as Gambo goes, it was seen once and then, sort of chopped up, disappeared. And then so I thought, okay, I can sort of get a little bit more fantastical with it. And I like starting out a story that way because if I can manage to make the reader believe in the most unbelievable thing possible, then the whole rest of the story, you're hooked, and it'll lend credibility for Winslow as a storyteller. And, the whole book ideally should feel like you're sitting right there and listening to this old man tell you his unbelievable tales. But then, like in the second book, for instance, in Winslow Hoffner's High Sailing Adventures, and here's the cool cover for it. And there's Winslow with the Loch Ness Monster. But he's surrounded by all these more super obscure creatures. Like right here on the shore, we have the Afonk, which is a Welsh cryptid, kind of mythical figure. And it has a reputation of being a water demon, and that had the ability to sort of flood areas just by tossing around in the deepest part of the river. And and it has a few different variations of how it was said to look, but one of the most famous was a hybrid between a crocodile and a beaver. And so I thought, this is already kind of like strange and the perfect creature to Winslowify. How do I make this now biologically feasible? How do I keep all these elements while making it sort of believable? And so I thought, okay, one way I like to do this is to just look at the creature purely in silhouette, just sort of like black out all the elements in my mind and then just sort of just stare at it for a second. And I thought, it looks like a big platypus. And then I started digging into that. And I was like, okay, asking the magic internet, I was like, has there ever been a more massive precursor to our modern platypuses? And there was one. It was not quite as big and fearsome as mine in the book, but it introduced the biological feasibility of it. When I came upon this discovery it was about like 2013, they discovered the tooth of a massive precursor to the platypus called Obdurodon theracouschild. And it had a tooth. And so it even has these great teeth. And so I can exaggerate that even further. Just a little bit more impressive fangs to arm the jaws, and a little bit bigger, and we have a monster.
Interesting. Yeah. That's pretty
Mhm.
cool. Especially that, there was a creature, predecessor creature to the modern day platypus that was, maybe considered megafauna or something like that. Kind of makes me think a little bit of like the white beasts of Sherman, New York, where people have claimed to see these almost megatherium type creatures, giant ground sloths that are somehow survived the extinction in the Ice Age. So yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. Do you have any authors or researchers that really kind of influence your writing, or that you kind of look to for inspiration?
Ooh. I'm hugely inspired by my great grandfather. I dedicated my book World of the Orb to him. Lawrence Schoonover was his name. And so it was pretty cool to have, learned that it's been done in my family. You know what I mean? When I was really young and I decided I wanted to be an author, I found out I started learning stories about him, and I had never gotten to meet him. He had died before, but and here's actually a pretty cool story about that. I got this sort of wall of autographs back here, and I have my great grandfather right there. And it was cool when I was putting this together. I thought, it'd be really neat. It's too bad, I don't have like an autograph from the other author in the family, Grandpa Schoonover. And we talked about paranormal stuff earlier. This one was kind of fascinating too. I don't think I've shared this with anyone. This might be a Strangeology exclusive. But I had started doing podcasts and stuff, and I guess one of my family members had seen one and heard me talking about him, and he sent me a big box of my Grandpa Schoonover's books, all of these historical fiction novels, and he didn't even include a note with it, and I was like, wow, and so I started going through all the books, and I picked up one, and then the first one that I opened, out twirls, like a leaf, a little card, and it's a book plate, and it says, "With the compliments of the author, Larry," and it's his handwriting. And so I got his signature.
Go. Nice.
So he was probably my biggest inspiration. I named the school that the kids go to in World of the Orb after his name before it was changed on Ellis Island. So it's they go to Von Schoonhoven High.
Huh.
And then as far as cryptids and sort of that aspect of it for the books, I have tons of books of like old. I really like the old sea maps, and sort of like they sort of dive into the different like medieval illustrations of stuff.
Yeah.
And then Lauren Coleman has like a great book for anyone who's just getting into cryptozoology A to Z. It's a nice easy read, and it's got a perfect introduction to all of those.
Yeah,
cryptids.
definitely. That one's on my shelf for sure.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, and Adam Benedict has an excellent book called Monsters in Print, which definitely appealed to me because there's the journalistic sort of themes in Winslow Hoffner's Incredible Encounters, being that our main character is a journalist and he's digging into Winslow's stories. And that book is an archive of a whole bunch of newspaper clippings of obscure beasts.
Yes.
So excellent.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's all that, all those interesting news articles from like the 19th century, the early 20th century, a lot of which is, I think, considered yellow journalism. People telling tall tales to maybe drive tourism or whatever to small towns that need some revenue and that kind of thing. But, there's some diamonds in the rough with that kind of stuff for sure. You've got stories of Bigfoot and other lake monsters and winged creatures, thunderbirds, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's really cool. What have been some of your favorite cryptids that you've researched and written about and included in these books thus far?
Ooh, I love them all. They're like my children. What's my favorite one? I think here I'll show you. There's one from there's a couple in the second book that are really killer. Let me see if I can I'll get the illustration out here. I do all the illustrations in the book, and so at the top of each of the chapters, you get this cool sort of art piece that introduces. This is called the Morgar, and this is my interpretation of the Morgar. So in Cornish legends, there's a creature sort of typically depicted as sort of like your classic sea dragon or like a plesiosaur type cryptid. But that was another example of adaptation of the cryptids where I just looked at it purely in silhouette. And this one was easy to do because the most famous photographs of this cryptid is basically a silhouette. It's like this big lumpy sort of wiggly mass emerging from the water. And I was just staring at it and I thought it looks like a big sea slug, you know? And so I adapted it in that direction. I thought it would be cool to do like a mollusk.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Super interesting for sure.
Yeah. And there's another one I was doing. I had a flash in my mind for one of the finale moments of book 2 where the characters were being pursued by a flying humanoid, which is kind of unusual for the Winslow series because it's so aquatic. And it, looked like sort of your classic Mothman type cryptid. And so I'll show you the picture of that too for the viewers on YouTube. There we go.
If you're watching on YouTube.
This is from the chapter Out of the Dark.
Totally. Yeah.
There he is. So we got the two reporters there in Winslow's borrowed truck, lugging some mysterious cargo, being pursued by this flying humanoid. And so I had gone in 2019 in preparation for this book. I was doing my research at the Mothman Festival.
Nice.
And so I met Faye DeWitt, and she told me her story when she had witnessed the creature. And she described it very vividly. She talked about, sort of the downy feathers, but then, arms, uniquely, not just the wings, but arms and wings. And that its body had this sort of, at least on the arms, this sort of draconic dinosaur-like flesh. And she could see the veins moving under it in the arms. I was like, man, and it didn't sound anything like, what I was preparing for my story. And I just sort of had the impulse to search up different stuff after that. So that was an example of where my research sort of developed, where it's like, maybe it's not the most obvious thing. And maybe it's something more obscure. And of course I love the obscure stuff. So I started searching. I felt compelled to look up gargoyle type cryptids. And then I found a great one. I found one from Chile. It was called the Manta Man. And so it was another flying humanoid type that, looked like some type of like a humanish manta ray swimming through the air.
Interesting.
And I thought, this is the one. That's our guy. So that's going to be the cryptid. And it was only seen like twice, which of course, it gives me all the creative license in the world.
Right. Yeah.
And we'll save Mothman for something else in the future.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different flying humanoids. One gargoyle type creature that made me think of, and what I thought you might have, what you were going to say was Frank Shaw's gargoyle, which was a sighting that happened, I think, in Houston. And it was the story of this guy, Frank Shaw. He was an employee of NASA. And I think he was like leaving work from, what's the name of the space center down there? I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But NASA's like headquarters in Houston. And he was leaving work and saw this winged humanoid perched on one of the buildings, and it looked just like a gargoyle. And I believe, if I remember correctly, after he like had this like tense moment, like stare off with this thing because it saw him and locked eyes with him. It like flew off and kind of like, I think flew towards him, but then like went up into the sky. And then that was the only time it was ever seen as far as I know. You know, could have been something like a Mothman or a Manta Man. Who knows? But yeah, you should look into that one for sure.
Fantastic. Yeah, I wrote it down as soon as you said it. That's cool.
Frank Shaw's Gargoyle. Yeah.
Ooh.
Why do you think there's such a fascination with cryptids and the unknown for people? You know, people who are into this stuff get, you know, very passionate. Of course, you know, we've got people doing podcasts, writing books, you know, attendees to all these events and stuff coming out in droves. You know, what do you think it is about this stuff?
It's the new last frontier. You know, it's the last frontier of the unknown. Just and there definitely is, we don't know everything that's out there. When it comes to the sea in the Winslow Hoffner books, you know, it's such an unexplored place. And, you know, you have these storms or these monsoons and, you know, a whole bunch of brand new species are discovered in a single day. When these things are washed ashore, all it takes is for one of those creatures to have been seen once but never verified, and you have a cryptid. And so, I think it's just it's sort of a thing that inhabits everyone's minds. And the unknown is fascinating. In the Winslow Hoffner series, it's usually the unknown is sort of seen as a source of fear, but in the Winslow Hoffner series, it's also a source of adventure. So we move from the fear of the unknown to the great unknown. And I think in the sort of cryptid community, I'm seeing that sort of come alive before my eyes. You know, the first book came out in 2018, and it was, you know, to me, it was just such a niche interest. But after 2020, after all the lockdowns, everyone suddenly has the same fascination. I noticed there's like all these great conferences that popped up out of nowhere. And so Winslow had this great renaissance of popularity, and I thought, awesome. Okay. I'm going to, you know, continue the series. I felt compelled to continue the series. And then I can kind of see why now. It's there was something in the air about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, since 2020, I mean, that's kind of when Strangeology started. There's really? Definitely,
awesome. Yeah. See, this is what I'm talking
I've always
about.
been into the strange and the unexplained. And as my listeners know, you know, I was always drawn towards books on Bigfoot and Nessie and UFOs and all that stuff since I was a little kid. And, you know, I had an old band like, around like 2006, 2007 or so, where I actually had a song that was called Point Pleasant, and it was about the Mothman.
Ooh.
I'm not going to tell you where you can find it though.
It's awesome. That's awesome.
But yeah, I was always into this stuff, but, yeah, it seems that it's a growing niche, a growing community of like-minded people that, you know, just love this stuff and want some answers, you know? Yeah, definitely. Now, do you, obviously there's a lot of skeptics out there, a lot of debunkers. Does that ever play a factor when you're writing about different cryptids and creatures? You know, do you kind of, pit one character on that perspective versus the other, or is anything kind of fair game?
Yeah, they're you know, like I said, there's different sources of skepticism, and that's sort of the fun when Winslow's telling his stories. Ken Keeley, our cook, is always like, you know, he's always trying to fact check him in real time and trying to trip him up, but Winslow tends to have some type of artifact from the journey, you know, ready to go in his pocket and sort of, you know, win over everyone at the bar and yeah, and so outside of the stories, it doesn't affect me. I think I'm fascinated by the mystery, and in the Winslow Hoffner books, I just sort of take the position that it's all true. You know, I've even adapted monsters where it's probably a case of misidentification. Like the Canvey Island monster is our opening creature in the first chapter of the second book. And, it's probably either a misidentified anglerfish or like a, what's it called? Like a frogfish, coffinfish, one of those. But in this one, I sort of took it and made it my own thing. Nice walking anglerfish with big, long frog-like legs, and so that's sort of the position that the books take, that it's all true. And if it's true, then, what would that be like, and how would that affect the real world? How would it affect the people who encounter them?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's it's good to be skeptical, but also to have an open mind with this kind of stuff. I think healthy skepticism, but yeah. Now, I know we've talked about a few of the cryptids in the book, in your book so far. What would you say is the most obscure or unique cryptid that you've run across in your research? Or the most intriguing one? Maybe not necessarily like North American or European, because obviously there's cryptids in every country in the world.
I would say, so I had to find a cryptid to match the mental image of this sort of high intensity scene at the end of the second book where Winslow was escaping some bad guys. And there were these cryptids in the water that were shelled mammalian cryptids with like super buoyant, like armored backs, but they were furry still. And I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this one? And so I researched so deeply until I eventually found one it's an Icelandic cryptid called the Skelja crimsli. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. But its name translates to shell monster. And in the book, I call them mostly Icelandic sea wolves. And so they're these cryptids that sort of exist on the shoreline, and they got all these sort of like a whole bunch of armorial plating that sort of like clatter together. And they're depicted as kind of these armored sort of semi-aquatic sloths.
Interesting.
And so I kind of adapted it looking at different Ice Age type creatures like the Glyptodon and things of that, and then just sort of mixing it all together. And so as soon as I kind of find that biological real world tether, then I feel comfortable like expanding and altering and stuff. And so we got that. He's featured right here on the bottom of the cover. There he is. I kind of gave him more of a Weasley head, kind of like a Wolverine. Yeah. And then he's got that great club tail here.
A little bit of armadillo armor, but then also, yeah. That's fun. Now, so you do all your own illustrations too. Yeah,
I do, yeah.
That's really cool. What came first? Was it the drawing or the interest in writing? I know you mentioned earlier on that, you always had a pencil or a crayon in your hand, but
yeah. I think nowadays I kind of do it both in equal measure, and it's kind of a process of my world building. Like I'll draw the creatures, in this case the cryptids or the fantasy monsters and stuff, like for World of the Orb. I have big notebooks where I create essentially encyclopedias of all of my different creatures and heroes and villains and stuff moving forward. And in that process of drawing them, you're doing all these nice fine details, and things sort of like reveal themselves to you in the moment. And so that's kind of cool. So then when it comes time to paint the pictures with your words, when you're typing it out, you have that extra fine layer of specificity.
Yeah. That's a really interesting process to, go through with, coming up with all these different ideas, these creatures, the characters, and bringing it to life through, visual medium, and then kind of expanding through the written medium. So yeah, you're doing some really, really cool work, Michael, I have to say. Yeah.
Thank you. Who's your favorite character so far, or your favorite cryptid from the audiobook?
Gosh. Trying to remember. I believe there was it the shark squid?
Oh yeah.
The shark squid.
the Millie Matterhorn chapter.
which makes me think of the Luska, which is I'm not sure if that was what you were referencing.
Yeah, it's what it's based on. Yeah,
it's like the real life sharktopus.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just so like equally ridiculous and terrifying. Like, you know, imagine running across a shark with tentacles that's just totally going to kill you. So no, that's a fun one for sure. Yeah.
It's cool. I think you're the second or third person to really like hone in on that chapter, because it's a very different chapter in the book, but it's also the point where the world expands the most. And so that's where we have our character Millie Matterhorn, who's a taxidermist who's putting together all these like little Frankensteinian monsters. And John is, of course, on the trail of some hard evidence, and he, you know, thinks he's in the wrong place, but it turns out later on he found exactly the right place.
Yeah. And speaking of world expansion, I'm wondering, are you gonna keep writing these books? Right, there's going to be some sequels, because there's a lot more to explore. Is the story going to take us to places beyond Nova Scotia and the British Isles? You know, are there other areas in the world that you're really just like wanting to get to?
We are going to get, we're going to go all over the world, really. I mean, Winslow, while the majority of it takes place in the present timeline on Nova Scotia, Winslow is kind of a citizen of the world. He's been everywhere. And so when he's telling his stories, like especially in the second book, there's a lot of Celtic stuff. You know, we talk about, there's a lot of stuff that takes place in Wales. We of course have an encounter with the Loch Ness monster in Loch Ness. And then as the series goes on, we're going to see more and more exotic and otherworldly places. Perhaps there's going to be 5 books in the main series.
Gotcha. It's a big undertaking.
Yeah, and there may be spin-offs too.
Cool. Yeah, I love it. I love it. And so, just train of thought here, real quick. Now, you know, you've done all this research. Do you think there's a kernel of truth behind a lot of the folklore around with these creatures and different cultures talking about this stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely do. I think, you know, when you dive deeply into these stories, a lot of them, on their face, you know, there's sort of 2 lines of thought where, you read something and then you're like, wow, there's no way. But then the more deeply you read, then you're like, maybe there's something to it. I was discussing with Cryptids of the Corn. We were talking about Trunco on one of their episodes. And, you know, that's a fascinating globster as well. Another globster. I love the globsters. This one was featured in the second Winslow Hoffner book. And it's essentially an aquatic elephant. I mean, it has an elephantine trunk, and then it had the original witnesses described it as having a big lobster-like tail. And, you know, how do those things possibly go together? You know, but in my research, you know, I come to find out there have been other trunked, you know, titanic sea monsters seen. Like for instance, there was the Glacier Island body. That was an unusual cryptid that washed ashore, and it looked like an aquatic mammoth as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, there were other other ones as well. I'm blanking on the names right now, but it goes even deeper into ancient mythology. There's an idea that anything on land has its answer in the sea. You know, you can find an equivalent. And in some cases that's true. So when I was adapting Trunco, I thought, you know, what's the closest relative to the elephant that is aquatic or semi-aquatic? And, you know, manatees are kind of, you know, sirenians are kind of a perfect avenue for that, for the adaptation. And so, you know, looking at other pachyderms like rhinoceroses who have dermal plating, those folds of thick flesh, I thought that could explain the lobster-like tail. If it has this sort of armorial but still dermal folds, and so that there's your lobster-like tail, and then and this one just happens to be fuzzy because that was the original sighting, that it was like covered in fur. It was called a fish like a polar bear in the
yeah. It's kind of like the hairy trout that was found one day, but I think it turned out that the hair was actually like a bacterial growth or a fungal growth or something like that, which is also super interesting in and of itself. Whether
it's interesting of it, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, it makes me think. They say that the ocean we've only explored, what was it, like 5 to 10%, and there's all these other zones. The further down you go underwater, there could be tons of stuff living down there that we'd never know about, because when it dies, it sinks to the bottom and gets recycled into the ecosystem with the bottom feeders, unless it washes up to shore, like a tentacle from a giant squid, which were thought to be just, they were cryptids up until about 20 years ago. Right. And then scientists finally got video footage of I can't remember if it was a giant squid or a colossal squid, because they're two different species. Yeah. But either way, you've got these creatures that can grow up to 48, 50 feet in length at least. Mm-hmm. So these old tales of sailors running into a kraken, capsizing boats and stuff are not too far fetched. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. You're going to enjoy the finale of the first book,
I can't wait to get to it.
We got a great kraken based on the St. Augustine mystery plot.
Nice.
Based on Octopus giganteus.
Nice. That's awesome. So, speaking of like creatures that were once cryptids, that are now confirmed, do you think there's any other, cryptids out there that are pretty like well known or thought about that have a good chance of being real today?
Yeah. A lot of them do. I mean, I think, it's kind of a basic one, but Bigfoot, I think, it's probably only a matter of time. Cause it's not that unusual of a monster. Things like that existed in the fossil record and, could still be around today as a sort of relic hominid. So definitely. Yeah. I think a lot of things, it'd be really cool to live to see the day of some of these cryptids confirmed. And there have been cryptids that were confirmed, like the okapi and even the platypus, our friend, the platypus that we mentioned earlier.
Right.
That was, they looked at that and they thought, there's no way, this is a hoax. And then it turned out to be, to be real, which is why I think that platypus is a perfect explanation for the Afonk, because, it wasn't until way, way more modern times that the platypus was like accepted as a real creature. And it's like, if we have a slightly larger one, you would probably call it like, it had the head of a crocodile and the body of a beaver.
Yeah. Such a weird animal, lays eggs and has a venomous barb on its back hind flippers and a duckbill.
Yeah, see, these cryptids aren't that crazy. We got monsters everywhere.
Sometimes things that are in the zoological record are sometimes more interesting. But I mean, going back to Bigfoot, we've got the Gigantopithecus that lived in Asia, gigantic primate, which I'm not convinced is what Bigfoot is. I there's all these different ideas of Bigfoot, whether or not it's flesh and blood, whether or not there's something more paranormal happening, interdimensional. Right. Is it an alien? I don't know the answer, but you kind of have to take everything in and form your own opinions on that. But it seems like there is something out there that people are witnessing. I think so. A lot of the times there's, people are like, there's no way hunters would see something out there. And it's like, do you realize how big the wilderness is? It's like, if you look at maps and look into the Pacific Northwest all the way up into Canada, like the amount of land that's just untouched by humans, even hunters and prospectors and all that stuff. If you're dealing with an intelligent relic hominid who might have a similar intelligence level to humans, they're not going to want to be found. You know, they're going to do anything they can to stay away, unless by accident. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I always love that Futurama episode where it's, 1,000 years into the future and Bigfoot, it's like alien civilizations, like they're interacting with all that, but Bigfoot still isn't confirmed. And I think it's Fry like runs into one in a national park and he's like, shh, like, don't tell anyone about me.
Yeah.
Oh man. So you've got more books in the works. What kind of release schedule can your readers expect for when the next book is going to come out?
Well, up next, I'm working on I'm in illustration mode, and I'm working on the anniversary editions of the first 3 Chicken Boy books.
Gotcha.
So, end of this year and beginning of next year, I'm going to release 1, 2, and 3 again, and they're going to be glorious and shiny and new. And then very soon after that, in the spring of next year, Winslow Hoffner 3 is going to hit the shelves. So you can check that out when it comes out. All the updates are on michaelthompsonbooks.com.
Nice. That's great. And just a couple more questions here for you before we go for the day. Do you have any advice for aspiring authors who are passionate about writing cryptozoology and folklore?
Yeah, I always say, write what you love, write the thing that you wish already existed. Because if you love it, chances are there's going to be people out there who have the same taste as you. I never expected that there would be this sort of love for the cryptids when I started writing the Winslow Hoffner books. But as it turns out, there are. So, write the story that comes to you. If there's a story that's coming to you, that's a sign that it's meant to be told, I think. And so if you get that down on paper, then you can worry about the marketing afterward. And sometimes things just sort of like magically unfold that way. I think it's important to write what you wish already existed.
Yeah, for sure. That's some solid advice. And one final question here. Do you have any upcoming speaking events or anything on your calendar that people should be aware of? Because you do the festival and convention circuit.
Yes, I'm doing a lot. This weekend, I'm heading out to Fairfax Comic-Con. I don't know how quickly this is coming out, but that's going to be this weekend in August, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Love doing the Comic-Cons. But after that, I'm going to be doing a speaking event. I'm a featured speaker at Cryptid Fest in Massachusetts, in Raynham, Massachusetts, on September 14th. I'm going to be one of the featured speakers there. And that's being thrown by my friend Jessica from the show Cryptidbits with General Tidbits. And this is her first ever cryptid event. And so I get to be one of the first speakers at the inaugural event. So be sure to check that out. It's going to be a nice cryptid party celebration of all things unknown.
Very cool. Very cool. Great. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Michael. Before we go, can you let my listeners know where the best place to find you online and to check out all of your books?
Sure. You can follow me on Instagram at mthompson_books, and you can find all of my books at michaelthompsonbooks.com. We have the Chicken Boy series for young readers. We have World of the Orb, our alternate world fantasy adventure. And then, of course, the Winslow Hoffner series, which is my folkloric fantasy on the high seas about cryptids, sea monsters, and epic urban legends that few have seen. But there's one man who happens to have seen them all, Winslow Hoffner. And I think your listeners are especially going to like that. So check that out. And there's going to be lots more of Winslow's adventures coming soon. michaelthompsonbooks.com.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much again. Yeah. And we'll talk to you soon. All right. Thanks again to Michael Thompson for coming onto the show today. Definitely check out his website and his book series and his art as well. All of that is going to be linked in the show notes. It's a wide, weird world out there, and it's great to have people like Michael who are just painting this picture and getting people into this subject. I think it's super important, so definitely check it out. As always, I want to give a huge thank you out there to everyone who checks out the Strangeology podcast. Those of you who download it, share it with friends and family. It helps me out so much when you do that. The Strangeology podcast wouldn't be possible without the support of listeners like you. And again, if you're looking for a way to support the show, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/Strangeology, where there's tons and tons of extra bonus content and perks. So check it out. To any advertisers or companies out there looking to collaborate with the Strangeology podcast or would like to be considered for an interview on the show, please send all business inquiries to info@strangeology.com. And if you have any stories, I want to hear about them. So definitely send in your stories, your encounters with the strange and unexplained, from cryptids, ghosts, aliens, you name it. Again, that's info@strangeology.com. And if you haven't yet, make sure to give me a follow over on all my social media accounts. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, Threads. I'm most active posting short form content on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. So if you're looking for more from me, definitely check that out. I have a series on cryptids, conspiracies, just these short little factoid videos, and people seem to love them. They get a lot of really good reach most of the time. So definitely check that out, and definitely keep an eye on my Instagram, because that's where I typically host giveaways, which I'm planning on doing one pretty soon. It's been quite a while since I've done one, so you'll definitely want to stay tuned there on that channel. And if you're looking for another way to support Strangeology, again, you can check out my Etsy shop, strangeology.etsy.com, where I have a whole assortment of cryptid, alien, and Fortean gear available on things like t-shirts, tank tops, long sleeves, sweatshirts, and hoodies with cooler weather that's right around the corner. I've also got stickers, magnets, prints, mugs, enamel pins, and more. I'm forgetting so much. You just go to the website. You got to check it out. And I'm always trying to add in new designs. So if you love cryptid and alien and that kind of merch, and you want to support the show, that's strangeology.etsy.com. Thank you so much. All right, that's all from me for now. I'm going to take a quick break here. Michael was able to hang out for a little while longer to chat about some more of his paranormal and ghost encounter stories. Super interesting and totally unexpected. And he has some really cool stuff to share. So you're not going to want to miss it. Members, stick with me, and for everyone else, until the next time, take care of yourselves and each other, and keep it strange. All right, welcome back, Patreon members, to Strangeology Beyond, your exclusive portion of the show. Michael, thank you so much for chatting with me today.